2024 was a really big year for trades in the NBA. There were some absolutely massive deals, and so I wanted to go back and look at not only what people thought about these deals at the time, but regrade them myself now. If we're going in order here, we're beginning with Pascal Siakam being traded from the Indiana Pacers. At the time, Toronto wanted to rebuild. They wanted to get assets out of not only Siakam, but OG Anunoby, who they had traded less than a month earlier, and Anunoby not on this list because he actually got traded December 30th of 2023. And the Pacers were in the middle of a season that would eventually take them to the Eastern Conference Finals. They had Tyrese Haliburton, who had this really fantastic first couple of months, and they felt like they needed to add a star alongside Tyrese Haliburton, and Siakam was the guy that they went and got. The deal was the Pacers get Siakam, the Raptors get Bruce Brown, Kira Lewis, Jordan Nwora, a 2024 first that becomes Isaiah Collier, a 2024 first that becomes Jacoby Walker, and a 2026 Indiana first-round pick. Now, in terms of the players in the deal, nobody's really done anything. Bruce Brown just hasn't really played for Toronto. He played a little bit for them after the deadline last year, hasn't played for them really at all this year, and the other players really don't matter. Now, Brown is an expiring contract, so they'll probably look to move him at the deadline, probably get something out of him, but the players aren't that consequential. The picks, on the other hand, are pretty interesting. The Raptors actually didn't use one of the first-round picks. They traded it away in order to get back Kelly Olynyk and also Agbaji, who's been really, really good for them this year, a legit asset. I think that's a positive trade for them. He's going to be a long-term kind of role player, strong player for them. The other first-round pick in the deal, Jacoby Walker, really hasn't done anything, and then, of course, you have the future first as well. If I was going to regrade this trade right now, for Indiana, I would give them a B+. It's still a question mark in terms of what the long-term ceiling of this team is. Indiana has been disappointing offensively so far this year, but given what they gave up, this is good value for a player in Siakam that is still like a borderline All-NBA caliber guy, or at least at the time they traded for him, he was. And we don't really know what the value of that 2026 first-round pick is going to end up being. That could completely shift how we look at this trade. But given that they got Siakam to sign a long-term contract, given that it was going to be difficult for them to get a player of that caliber without trading that much stuff away, I still really like the deal and the value for Indiana. The Raptors, on the other hand, I'm going to give them a B. I like the fact that they went ahead and pulled the plug on the rebuild. They traded away OG Anunoby. They traded away Pascal Siakam. It's just not as much value as you'd like to have, even for a guy that was going into free agency the following offseason, which of course did limit his value, but I felt like they could have gotten more out of Siakam, obviously TBD on what some of the future assets end up becoming. In terms of what people thought about the deal at the time, I think people thought that they got really good value out of Siakam. Multiple first-round picks always looks really nice until they become late first-round picks, and then you actually see the players that you get, and in this case, they might not actually end up doing that much in a pretty weak draft class there in 2024, and people really liked it for Indiana because our concept of what Indiana was going to be as a team was much, much higher at the time than it is now. So I think more favorably, this has shifted towards Indiana given the value they traded for Siakam, but I still think it's a good deal for both teams. That was our only big 2024 trade deadline deal to talk about. Now we go into the summer. We've got the Pelicans trading for DeJounte Murray from the Atlanta Hawks. The deal was the Pelicans get Murray, the Hawks get Dyson Daniels, EJ Liddell, Larry Nance, Cody Zeller, a 2025 Lakers first, a 2027 Milwaukee or New Orleans first, top 4 protected, whichever of those is lower. Larry Nance has been solid for the Hawks, but the other players really aren't that relevant outside of Dyson Daniels. And this is the biggest thing about this trade. I'm not sure that you would trade right now, straight up, Dyson Daniels for DeJounte Murray with no picks attached. I really think there's that much value to what Daniels does on the defensive end of the floor. He's still young. Obviously, there's a contract thing there, so they can't actually be traded one for one. But when you compare that to Murray, who's good, but it's really not that hard to find a DeJounte Murray kind of guard in the NBA anymore. Like he's not one of the 10 best guards in the league. He's just kind of an above average scoring guard. And I just think that the skill set of Daniels is more unique. And honestly, he's been fantastic for Atlanta. Obviously, he needs to figure out how to shoot the ball better, and he really didn't do that much for New Orleans in his time there. But that is the craziest thing about the deal, is if the contracts for whatever reason matched, I don't think you would trade away Dyson Daniels just to get DeJounte Murray back straight up. And that's before we even get to the picks, because that 2025 Lakers first looks better all the time. That could easily be a lottery pick in a loaded Western Conference. And then the 2027 first, if Milwaukee and New Orleans are still good, it's the least favorable of those two teams. So it's unlikely that's going to be a lottery pick, but still, that's really good value for Murray. And the problem here for New Orleans, of course, is that this has been a disaster nightmare season for them. Murray got hurt immediately, has only recently started to come back and play for them. Everybody else on the roster has been hurt. You're completely unsure about what the future is going to be, and obviously that impacts their future draft selections as well. If I was going to regrade this trade right now, for Atlanta, I'd give them an A+, because it was a really difficult decision to make at the time, because you knew that when you traded away DeJounte Murray, you were going to get less than what you traded for him from San Antonio when they gave away multiple first-round picks to get DeJounte Murray. They knew they were going to get less, and they made the move anyway and ended up getting a ton of value in exchange and a piece in Dyson Daniels that makes a ton of sense on their current team around Trae Young. For the Pelicans, I have to give them a D grade. The only reason it's not an F is just because we haven't seen enough of Murray in terms of how he's actually going to impact that team. But they've just been such a disaster, and they gave up, in hindsight, so much, multiple firsts and Dyson Daniels, that there's no way you can grade this positively. At the time, I wasn't a huge fan of the deal for New Orleans because of Murray's inability to space off the ball. He needs to be like an on-ball guard, and they already had Zion and Brandon Ingram and the team. It just felt weird in general. They were giving away bigs despite the fact they didn't have a big man replacement on the roster at the time. And for Atlanta, I think most people thought it was pretty solid value. People definitely were higher on the Pelicans side of this then than they are now, because they felt like they didn't really have to give that much to get DeJounte Murray, but now obviously things have shifted pretty dramatically. Next up now is a big one. The New York Knicks trading for Mikal Bridges. I'm sorry if I'm smiling here. I am a Nets fan. I'm unbiased when it comes to trade breakdowns, but I am happy about this one, certainly as a Nets fan. The Knicks got Mikal Bridges, and the Nets got a whole bunch of picks. I'm just going to put them on screen. I don't feel like reading through all of them. A ton of picks, like 5 first-round picks, a pick swap, a bunch of stuff. Here's the bottom line. Mikal Bridges has played a lot for the Knicks this year. He's been durable. He's been playing a lot of minutes. He has not been very good. I've talked about this on other channels. He has not been a good defender in like 2 years. I don't know if he's just lost that, but he has not been an above average defender in literally 2 years. And offensively, he's been fine, making some mid-range shots, occasionally making some corner threes and stuff, but he's obviously not going to be the engine of the offense. They knew that when they traded for him, but this is a lot of value in exchange for a guy that you thought was going to be the third best player on your team, and he's just been fine, especially when you consider the fact that their overall record hasn't been that great either. We're going to talk about some other Knicks trades certainly throughout the video, but if you're just evaluating how good Mikal Bridges has been on the Knicks relative to the value they traded away, he has not been close to the value they traded away in exchange for him. If I had to grade this trade today, I would give the Knicks a D. And again, it's just like the Murray thing. The only reason it's not an F is because he's been on the team like 2 months, and in a couple more months, maybe he figures it out defensively. Maybe they're just better overall as a team. They gel together. They've obviously changed so many pieces within one offseason, which, like I said, we're going to talk about a little bit later. So I can't really give them an F just because we've seen such a small sample size, and maybe they make the conference finals or the finals. Mikal Bridges is a huge part of that, and that wing combination of him and OG Anunoby is fantastic. That's still a possibility, but if you're just looking at value and what they traded away, they massively overpaid for what Mikal Bridges has been giving them so far, which means that on the other hand, the Nets get an A++++. I've honestly never seen peak value personified more than what the Nets got in exchange for Mikal Bridges in this deal. He was fine for the Nets, but again, wasn't very good defensively, certainly proved that he wasn't this top-level offensive player, and they got 5 first-round picks for him. It's unheard of for a above-average role player. Like, I don't even think Mikal Bridges is playing at a borderline all-star caliber level this year. I really don't think that he's even been there, and I got 5 first-round picks for him. It's unbelievable. At the time, people were pretty optimistic about the deal for the Knicks because they thought they were going to get the Nova Knicks thing. It felt like a group that made sense together. This was pre-Karl Anthony Towns trade, and I liked the upgrade in terms of going out and getting pieces and really going for it this year. But generally speaking, people liked the deal despite the fact that it was a lot of stuff. They felt like the Knicks were going to be good enough to justify that stuff, and that just hasn't been the case so far. Next up, let's talk about the Kings adding DeMar DeRozan. You probably forgot about this one. If you had to list some of the biggest trades in 2024 in the NBA, you probably did forget that this one actually existed. In this deal, the Bulls got 2 second-round picks, the Spurs somehow got Harrison Barnes and a first, and the Kings got DeMar DeRozan. The Bulls basically were just trying to get any kind of assets out of DeRozan that they could. This was later on in the free agency period where the Kings wanted to bring in DeRozan, but they didn't have the cap space to do it, so they had to facilitate a sign and trade. So it wasn't a true, they're trading away DeRozan under contract for stuff. So the Bulls got, a little bit there. The Spurs took on the money and got a first-round pick for their troubles, and Harrison Barnes has also actually been good for San Antonio this year. And then the Kings got DeRozan. If I had to grade this deal right now for the Bulls, I'd give them a B. It's fine. You got good assets. For the Spurs, I'd give them an A+. Getting a first-round pick and Harrison Barnes for nothing here has been fantastic for them. And the Kings, I give them a C. Like, DeMar has been what you would expect DeMar DeRozan to be. He's going to make a lot of mid-range jump shots. He's probably going to be pretty consistently 20 to 25 points every single night. But on the makeup of their team, especially with the drop-off of Keegan Murray's play this year, he just isn't that additive. They already had perimeter scoring. They already had guys that could attack offensively. They needed defenders. They needed wing defenders. They needed size. And DeMar DeRozan didn't provide any of that. And in the moment, for the value they gave up, it made sense to just as a talent play, add DeRozan and then use some of these other assets that they have to bring in more size and depth and defense on the wing. But they haven't done that, and generally speaking, the Kings have been disappointing this season, so I would give them a C grade. At the time, there weren't a lot of takes about this. People were kind of like, oh yeah, I see the mindset. I didn't love it because I didn't understand the perimeter spacing aspect of having DeRozan on this team. But generally speaking, I think we're falling a little bit below people's expectations for this trade at the time for Sacramento. And then the last big trade of 2024, at least so far, hopefully we don't get another one within the next couple of weeks here after I post this video, but the Knicks added Karl-Anthony Towns in October, not that long before the start of the season. The Knicks got Towns and the Timberwolves got Julius Randle, Donte DiVincenzo, and a first-round pick. The Karl-Anthony Towns, Jalen Brunson combo, I honestly feel like it's been under-discussed how difficult it has been to guard those guys to begin this season. That combination offensively has been fantastic. Despite Brunson's scoring numbers being down a little bit, that is just such a difficult duo to try and guard with Cat's shooting ability, and his spacing has been incredibly impactful for the Knicks. Meanwhile, the Timberwolves have been kind of a disaster. This is a team that was in the conference finals a couple of months ago, and now the vibes are just totally off. It doesn't look like Julius Randle wants to be there. There's been scuffles between him and Rudy Gobert and Anthony Edwards. Donte DiVincenzo has been terrible, and yes, they get the first-round pick, but overall, they made their team worse with this deal, but that's kind of what we thought about the deal at the time, that they were making a conscious choice to look at the team that made the Western Conference Finals and say, from a money standpoint, we can't keep Cat, Gobert, McDaniels, and Edwards all on the team. We have to pick one of them. They picked Cat to get rid of, and they wanted a more sustainable long-term approach despite just making the conference finals, and all of that has played out. I don't think they necessarily anticipated Randle and DiVincenzo being as bad as they have been, whether it be for the vibes or just on the floor, but this has not worked out well for Minnesota at all. Again, even if the concept was making their team a little bit worse. If I had to grade this right now for the Knicks, I would actually give them an A. I know that Cat hasn't been very good defensively. I know we just talked about how the Knicks have been disappointing relative to where we thought they would be. If you just look at the value that they traded away, what Julius Randle has done in Minnesota, what DiVincenzo has done in Minnesota, and then obviously the first-round pick, even with the contract that Karl-Anthony Towns is on, that is unbelievable value. And I actually think Cat has been underrated this season. He's going underappreciated how good he's been so far this year. Meanwhile, for Minnesota, I give it a C-. There's still upside here long-term because of the draft pick. Dillingham's been good, although separate from this deal, you can see kind of the long-term vision of the team. I don't expect Randle to be on the team, whether it be past the trade deadline or certainly in the offseason when his contract expires. So I'm not really sure kind of where the team is going beyond this, but I understand why they wanted to add the flexibility of getting rid of Karl-Anthony Towns. Those are all of my regrades. It's been an interesting year for trades. I hope we get some more big ones here in 2025.